Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Sociological Theory. So in this lesson, what we're going to be talking about is Berger and Luckmann's theory of social construction as they first described in their book, The Social Construction of Reality. And so as always, you really want to have your handout with you as you go through this video so that you can follow along with what I'm saying. At various points in this video, I'm going to be switching from just seeing me to the handout so you can kind of follow along with what I'm saying. Okay, so what is, how can we connect Berger and Luckmann's theory back to some of the classical thinkers that we have read in the first half of the semester? So we can connect it to Emil Durkheim and his idea of social facts. So if you remember, Durkheim believed that sociology was really the objective and scientific study of social facts. So what is a social fact? So if you remember, a social fact is really made up of two things, right? It's something social that is first external to humans, right? So just outside of, just something external or independent from just a bunch or group of humans, right? So that could be something like language or religion, right? Something that exists long before the humans who are alive today existed and will keep on going long after we're all dead, right? So something that's independent of the humans who are living at the moment. So first external, and then the second is it's coercive, right? So coerciveness is a second attribute of a social fact. So these independent social facts also have a power over us, right? They can shape what we do, right? So for example, religion or, even language shaping how you speak or what you say. And so the big question now is, well, where do these social facts come from, right? How did these social facts come into existence? The argument of today is that these social facts are socially constructed. They are created by us, right? We perceive them as just to be a reality of the world, right? That language and religion and other things we just kind of take for granted. But the argument of today is we have obviously created these social facts, right? We create the social world around us. And so this is the point I'm really going to be driving home again and again today. Okay, so now let me switch to the handout and we can see kind of basically what we're going to be looking at today, or what I'm going to be talking about. Okay, so here you should hopefully see the handout, right? So we're going to be looking at the theoretical background, asking some basic questions, then talking about Berger and Luckmann and their description of reality, and then talking about the idea of social construction, and then talking about how reality is socially constructed. And then we kind of summarize it all up at the end. Okay, so let's start with the first part, right? What's the theoretical background of this concept of social construction? That would be the theory of phenomenology as described by Edmund Husserl and Alfred Schutz. So let me talk a little bit more about that. So what is this concept or this philosophy of phenomenology? So it's a philosophy that was created in the late 19th and early 20th century by the French philosopher Edmund Husserl. So what did he say? So a big question for philosophy is, how do we know the reality out there, right? How do we know as a mind or a brain, how do we know what reality is really going on out there? And can we even know that there is a reality? And so what Husserl said is, okay, yes, there probably is some objective thing out there called reality. But what he argued is what we perceive, what we see in our eyes, right? The room, the door, the trees, the cat, the dog, everything around us, everything that we perceive through our eyes and our ears, well, that's actually created by our own minds, right? This is the basic gist of phenomenology, right? That the world we perceive out there is actually a construction or creation of our own mental processes, right? that, we take some raw input coming in, color and light, some things that happen to our fingers when, we touch something, right? And we take that raw input, and our minds create the world out there as we perceive it. And so everything that we see, all the trees and the cars and the roads, right? All that is actually a mental creation of the world out there. What Husserl says is, well, we don't really realize that, right? We don't think about that. We adopt what he calls a natural attitude. We just take the reality of the world for given. We just accept it and be like, oh, well, no, these things just exist. My cat, my dog, the trees, the plants, my car, these are just all real. And, my natural attitude is just to live in the world and not really to think about it that much and just to take it for granted. And really, there is no way to live in the world otherwise, right? You can't question everything, every moment and every second, be like, oh, was this car really real? And, is my cat really here? That you couldn't do that. And so rather what we do is we adopt this natural attitude where we accept the reality of the world. We just take it for granted as this kind of movie or show that's just playing in front of our eyes, but we don't even realize it's playing. Right? But Husserl will say, look, we're, as a philosopher, though, I can say, well, no, well, this reality that I perceive, all the things I see and hear, that's actually a mental creation of my mind, even if I don't, even if I'm not like thinking about that, or even if I'm taking it for granted. Okay, so that's Husserl, right? He really had this really fascinating idea saying, the world that we perceive out there is a creation of our own mental, consciousness. So who took this a little bit further? That would be Alfred Schutz, so a German philosopher and psychologist, and also a sociologist, actually. And so he really, he took on this idea of Husserl and said, accepted it. But what he said was, actually, it's not just a creation of one single mind. It's not just your mind on its own creating the perception out there, but he said it's actually the creation of a social group, right? We exist within a group of people, our families, our towns and villages, the people around, and those social groups together collectively create the mental perceptions of the world out there that people are perceiving. What Schutz called this is, he called this the idea of a life world, right? The life world is the perception of reality that a social group creates and adopts. And so different societies will actually have different perceptions of reality, right? The way I perceive reality here in this life world of America is different than the reality that I might perceive if I was a Chinese person living in China, right? That because of the different social groups that those people we exist in, then our perception of reality is also different. Right? So we can see here that this really sets up this idea of the concept that social facts are socially constructed. Okay, so that's the background. We have Edmund Husserl and the philosophy of phenomenology saying we mentally create our perception of the reality out there. And then we have Schutz saying that this is a collective creation of a social group that he calls a life world. So let me go back now to the handout. Okay, so we got the theoretical background. Now we want to basically ask three questions. The three questions that really, lead us into the theory of Berger and Luckmann. So the first question is, what do they mean by everyday reality? Their reading and their book is about the social construction of everyday reality. So what is this thing called everyday reality? How do they describe it? Right? That's in the first part of your reading. Then in the second question we have is, how is this everyday reality? How is this thing called everyday reality? How is it socially constructed, right? What does that mean to say something that reality is socially constructed, right? Then thirdly is, okay, once we have the basic idea of that, how is it socially constructed? That is, what is the process through which something gets socially constructed? So here we have the first part, right? The first question, what is everyday reality? Right, so I'm going to switch back to me, and you'll have your handout with you so you can follow along. Okay, so what is Berger and Luckmann's basic description of everyday reality? So what we see is that they come up with actually a pretty basic and I think pretty clear definition of what we mean by reality. So what they say is that reality is something that exists that is independent of my mind. That's what I think anyway, right? That, say, for example, this book, the textbook, right? This is real because it exists, outside of my mind. I can't think it away. I can't make it disappear with my mind, right? That these things are real because they exist independent of what's going on in here, right? And so reality is really all the things out there in the world that are real, right? This table, the chair I'm sitting in, the house I'm in, the outside, the trees, the cats, the dogs, my car, right? Reality is everything that just is there, that exists out there and independently of my mind. And that's what we really mean by reality is what they say. So how do we experience this reality? They say, well, we have a common sense experience, very similar to the natural attitude, right? Reality is something that we really don't think about that much. We don't question it. We just take it for granted, right? The idea that books exist and that cars exist and my cat and dog exist, I don't question that. I don't even think about it. It's just part of the background functioning of my mind, right? That I take reality, the world out there, just for granted, right? It's something that is just there and I don't even really think about it or question it, right? They delve a little bit deeper and they say, okay, I take it for granted, it's unquestioned. What is this reality really? They say, well, it's based around two things. It's based around time and space. The reality I perceive is a reality of the here, right? So this time right now, right? So for example, what time is it? Right? So it is 5:30, right? And also a space, right? A now, right? In my room, in Vermont, in Cambridge Township, in Lamoille County, Vermont, in America, on planet Earth, right? You can get more and more specific, right? In the office room, right? And so that all of this is, my reality I perceive is always based around a time, right? Where am I? When am I right now? Right? So 5:30 on Monday in March, right? And a space, in a office studio in Lamoille County in Vermont in United States, right? On planet Earth. So, and again, that's something I just take for granted. I don't think about what time it is. I don't think about the day of the week. I don't think about the month usually. This is just part of my background functioning, mental functioning of being in the world. Okay, what else do they say? They say that reality has a certain order to it, right? So I'll go back to the slide so we can see the quote. Right? So the first quote here, right? The reality of everyday life is organized around the here of my body and the now of my present, right? This is the realism, they say, of my consciousness, right? Whenever you're awake, you're perceiving what's around you in a given time. The everyday reality of the world is ordered, right? It has a certain pattern to it or a certain structure, right? That we put the objects or the things in the world, the real things, we put them into boxes or categories, right? The idea of a cat, your cat or your dog, well, that's, that's a category, the category of cats, the category of pets, the category of a mammal, right? Or, tables and chairs. These are also categories of objects, right? And so the world we see around us is really patterned or ordered. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. That's a pattern or order of time, right? What they do is they call this typification, that we put everything in the world into certain types, right? You even can think about me, right? The person you're seeing in your screen, right? Male, Caucasian, adult, right? Professor, American, right? All of these are simply categories of things, right? It's not me individually, but it's the boxes, the categories or types that I belong to. Okay, what else do they say? Lastly, they say something very important. Reality is intersubjective. And this is very important. So what this means is it's not just my reality, and it's not just your reality, right? As if our realities were just separate, but rather it's our reality, right? That what reality really means is not an individual experience, but it's that we're all experiencing the same thing. It's our here and our now all together, right? And so if you're, it's Monday for everybody, right? Or it's, it's all, if you're going about your day, it's the same day that you're experiencing that everybody else is experiencing, right? And so different humans, right? We inhabit a world in which there are other real humans, and those real humans have the same perception of reality as I do. That's what I think anyway. And that together we are living in or existing in the same reality. To use a little bit of a weird metaphor here, we can think of reality as a multiplayer computer game, right? It's a computer game in which there's multiple humans all interacting together on the same landscape, in the same world. And this makes it even more real, right? The fact that we both perceive a cat, the fact that we all are driving cars, the fact that we all think it's Monday, that makes those things even more real to me, right? Then I'm like, oh, that's really something that's objectively real because everybody's agreeing. So to summarize this all up, the reality that I perceive with my mind is something that I take for granted. It's common sense. It's something that exists out there, right? It's independent of my mind. It's something that is around a here and a now, and it's something that has an order or pattern to it and is, importantly, intersubjective. A bunch of people experience the same reality together. Okay, so we have a basic idea of how Berger and Luckmann describe reality, right? This description of reality that I just went through. Now the question is, what does it mean to say that this reality is socially constructed? Right? So we're on to that second question of the lesson for today. So here what I'm doing is I'm really describing the basic idea of the social construction of reality, an idea of the very concept of social construction. Okay, so what is this concept? Okay, here it is. So we think that there is a reality out there that is independent of my mind, right? It just exists. I take that for granted. That's the way I perceive it. The argument of social construction is, even though we believe that's what is, that's the reality is like, even though that's how we perceive it, the reality out there is actually something that is created and constructed by humans, right? That the objective reality of the world is actually not objective, but it is a construction of social groups. It is a social construction. And so we can think about this in terms of categories, right? This idea of typification. So let me kind of give a example, right? So here's a really simple one. What day is it today? Monday, right? That's just, oh, well, I know what day it is, right? That's it. The way I perceive that is that that's just the a part of the reality of the world. The argument of social construction is, okay, but who created Monday? Who created the days of the week? That was obviously humans, right? We created this time, right? We created the days of the week. We created the months. We created the hours and the minutes. And so this now that you're experiencing, this day of the week or this time, you experience it as something that's just objectively true or real. But in reality, it is a construction of the social group that you belong to. Right? And so they say that this is the general argument of social construction, that the things that you perceive out there, the categories and objects that exist in the world are actually creations of social groups. And so we can think about this in many different ways, right? In many different examples. We can think about this in terms of types of people, right? What's the difference between a child and a teenager and an adult and an elderly person, right? That is simply those categories of people, those age groups are actually the creation of humans. Yes, human bodies naturally biologically age, but those types, those categories of adult versus old person or elderly, that is simply the mental creation of a social group, right? We have created these things, but we don't realize that. We just take it for granted. Right? We have this natural common sense attitude where we forget or don't realize that we are the creators of the reality that we perceive to be just out there. So that is the basic idea of the social construction of reality, right? That the everyday reality that you perceive is actually doesn't actually exist independently out there, but is actually created by you and everybody else. And so there's a certain irony to this, right? The social constructionists talk about an irony, right? The irony is that people think and perceive that there is this reality out there, and they don't realize that they themselves have created that reality, right? They don't realize that they're the creators of the reality they perceive to be existing independently of themselves. Okay, now we're on to the last part. So let's say that we accept this idea of social construction. Let's say that we accept the idea that reality is created by humans. How is it created? And so Berger and Luckmann talk about this process, and they call it the institutionalization of reality. And so what is it? There's three parts to it. There's habitualization, objectivization, and then internalization. But first off, what does it even mean to say something is institutionalized? So what they really mean is that what happens is that people, as they live together, as humans live together as a unit, they create certain patterns of behavior, right? They create certain routine ways of living in the world. And then what happens is that these routine ways of living become what is called an institution, right? A pattern of behavior that just becomes taken for granted or just accepted. And so what they say is what happens is it's not just patterns of behavior that get created by humans, but it's also patterns of perception, right? What we see, what we believe about the world is also a pattern that is created by humans. Right? So this is really this idea of institutionalization. We create patterns of behavior and then also patterns of thinking. Let's see an example. So what's a pattern of behavior? So a classic pattern of behavior of humans is marriage, right? That marriage is simply actually a pattern of behavior, right? It's saying you have these people, one or two people, right? Two people, sometimes more than two people, and they're going to have this pattern behavior in which they're going to have romantic relations with each other. They're possibly going to raise children, and they're going to share economic resources. What are we going to call this? Oh, we're going to call it marriage, right? An idea here is that who created marriage? Well, we did, right? Humans created this pattern of behavior. Marriage is a very old institution. It was created, at least a couple of thousand years ago, and people keep doing it, right? People keep getting married to each other, right? So it's a pattern of behavior that has persisted over time. But it's not just a pattern of behavior, it's also a pattern of thinking. We think and we accept the idea that marriage exists. We accept the idea of married people, right? We label people as married or single, right? And so marriage isn't just a pattern of behavior, it's an idea, right? Who created that idea? We did. And so we create patterns of behavior, but we also create ideas. But we think, we believe that these things are just exist, that they have a reality independent of ourselves. We forget that we have socially constructed this reality of marriage. So what is the three-step process that they talk about? So let me stick with the slide for a little bit. So the first step is what they call habitualization. And so they say, okay, let's imagine an island somewhere. And in this island, people just keep doing the same thing over and over again, right? They wake up in the morning and let's say that they're planting some food in the ground, right? They do this again, they do this tomorrow and they do it again next week and they keep doing it. And then eventually this habit just becomes, this becomes a habit, right? It becomes something routine. It becomes something they no longer think about. Right? They just start getting up in the morning like, oh, I guess I'm going to go to this ground over here and plant some of this vegetables or plant some of this corn and stuff, right? And so people have this pattern of behavior, this routine way of living, right? So that's the first thing, right? Humans are habitual creatures. We create routine practices and routine ways of perceiving the world. And Berger and Luckmann called this habitualization. So what's the next step? So the first step is just creating a pattern, a routine way of acting, and a routine way of thinking. What's the next step? The second step is what they call objectivization. So what's the problem? So they say, okay, here's the problem. How do you get the next generation to do the same thing that you want to do? Right? You created this pattern of behavior. Now you've been doing it for like 20 or 30 years. How do you make sure that your children do the same thing that you're doing? How do you make sure that your children perceive the world the same way that you do? What you do is you say, you give your pattern a legitimacy. You say, okay, this isn't just what we do. This is what everybody does, and this is the way it must be done. This is the only way to do it, right? So if your children say, oh, why do I have to walk over here and put these vegetables in the ground? And you say, look, that's just what we do. You have to do this. It's the only thing you must do, right? That we give our practices a degree of legitimacy, right? We say that this is the only way to do it, and it's the right way to do it, and it must be done this way, right? We instruct our children, in our practices, and we give them our practices a moral force. We say it has to be done this way. And so what's happening here is for our children and also for ourselves, these practices become real, more real, right? They become more legitimate. They become not just one way of doing things, it becomes the only way of doing things. And we begin to give things names. So the children say, well, what's this thing called where we put the vegetables in the ground? like that's in rows. And we say, oh, well, that's a crop, right? And, and so this idea of a crop, crop of wheat or crop of corn, that takes on a reality. Now it has a name. Now it says, oh, we gotta go tend to crops, right? And so it not just doesn't just become something we do, it becomes to be an independent, real thing of the world. Part of this objectivization is, they say, forgetting, right? So what are you going to forget? You're going to forget that you ever created the thing, right? You don't want to think of it as artificial or fake, right? And so you have to forget that you actually created this way of doing things. You forget that you created marriage. You forget that you created the days of the week. You forget that you invented this idea of crops. And you say, well, no, this was the way it always was. There was always a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. There was always been marriage, or, conservatively, there's always been marriage between a man and a woman. And so it has to be this way, right? And so these things, they take on an independent reality, partly because we forget that we created them. What's the last step? What they call internalization, but what we might just call socialization, right? Here with internalization is basically what you're doing is you're putting the reality into somebody's minds. Whose mind? Your children's mind, the next generation. You are getting them to internalize the reality, to get them to see the world the same way that you see it, right? Remember, intersubjective reality is really important. And so why do we all see the reality in the same way? Because as children, we have been trained to see the reality out there as the way we perceive it, right? And so this reality that we perceive is actually something that has been socialized into us from a very young age, ever since that we were infants, right? We go about the world and you're like, oh, what day is it today? Mommy or daddy, oh, today's Monday and tomorrow's going to be Tuesday. We learn. And when we learn as young children, we learn to perceive reality. And then the most important part of this is learning a language, right? When you give somebody a language, you're giving people words for things that exist out there: cat, dog, car. And when you teach somebody these words, then you are teaching them reality. You are getting them to internalize the perception of the world out there. And then the last part of this is it really takes on a moral force, right? That it really is about perceiving the reality as the only way or the right way to see the world. Let me now try to summarize this all up. So the idea of social construction is basically this idea that we take reality for granted, right? We think that the reality that we perceive out there is just what's out there. But the argument of social construction is that we together collectively have created that reality through the process of habitualization, objectivization, and then internalization, right? That we create and construct a reality we think just exists naturally in the world out there. And in this way, then, two things happen. This reality becomes what? External to us, right? Becomes something independent of humans, right? So that's the first thing of a social fact. And then secondly, it becomes coercive, right? We have to perceive the world that way. Our perception of reality actually affects us, shapes what we do, shapes how we think, right? And so reality is actually a social fact, right? It is something that's external to humans and something that has a degree of power over them. Who created this social fact of reality? We did. And so that's basically, the lesson for today, right? That this reality, this social facts that Durkheim talks about, Berger and Luckmann are arguing is something that humans created themselves.